Take your invoices and your damn lawyers and crawl back to whatever ditch you came from, old man. The second I stepped into his service bay, that arrogant dealership owner, Todd Belden, grabbed my shirt collar, screaming insults in front of his entire crew. He thought he was the alpha male. He thought I was just a defenseless old man he could intimidate. He had absolutely no idea. He just put his hands on a man who spent 8 years extracting hostages from rooms where the psychopath across from me had a loaded weapon and nothing left to lose. I didn't flinch. I peeled his fingers off my collar, one by one, and calmly placed my phone on the tool chest between us. The second that recording started playing, his face turned the color of dead concrete. He heard his own voice, then his brother's, and then the sound of my daughter crying in terror. His perfect little empire didn't just crumble. It was textbook targeted for demolition. Hey everyone, welcome to Revenge Blueprint. If you love real family stories filled with secrets, betrayal, hidden truths, and quiet justice, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. You're going to want to stay with me until the very end of this one, because what happened that night changed our family forever. My name is Mack Stovall, and you're about to watch a masterclass in how a father wages a ruthless 2-year war to utterly destroy the monsters who touched his family. Stay until the bitter end. But here's the thing about that moment in the service bay. Todd Belden thought he was ending a problem. He had no idea he was walking into the final chapter of a war he never even knew he was losing. The man whose collar he grabbed wasn't just a Nashville landscaper with a cracked dashboard and 4 employees. He was the kind of man who had spent 8 years keeping completely still in rooms where one wrong word meant someone didn't come home. The kind of man built by experience most people never earn for exactly this kind of patience. Todd saw broken-in boots and gray temples. He made a quick, quiet decision about what he was looking at. That decision was wrong in every direction, and Mack Stovall had been waiting 2 years for it to be. Here's where it starts. My name is Mack Stovall. I'm 58 years old, and I own a landscaping and grounds maintenance business outside Nashville, Tennessee. Stovall Lawn and Grounds. 4 employees, a fleet of 3 trucks, a trailer for the equipment. We maintain about 40 residential accounts and 11 commercial properties. Nothing spectacular, nothing that makes the newspaper. I drive a 2009 Ford F-250 with a cracked dashboard that I never fixed. The crack runs from the passenger side all the way to the left of the steering wheel in a long diagonal, like someone drew a line with a ruler. My wife Donna told me it gave the truck character. That was 11 years ago. She passed 3 years back. The crack is still there. I am not a large man. 5'10", 170 pounds on a good week. 165 after a hot summer of manual labor. Gray at the temples, hands that look their age. I wear work shirts and broken-in boots to everything except church and funerals, and even then I sometimes forget to switch. Most people who meet me for the first time make a quick, quiet decision. They file me in the folder marked harmless, blue collar, background character. That decision has been wrong for a very long time. From 1994 to 2002, I worked for a private security contractor called Meridian Protective Services. Meridian specialized in executive protection, site security, and the division I eventually joined, personnel recovery. We extracted corporate executives, NGO workers, journalists, and government-adjacent civilians from dangerous situations in Latin America and the Middle East. The polite phrase is hostage rescue. The accurate phrase is more complicated. I got there through an odd path. I'd done 4 years in the Army, nothing special, military police, Fort Bragg, and when I got out, I was 22 with no college and no plan. A guy I'd served with knew a recruiting contact at Meridian. He said the work paid well and that I had the right kind of temperament for it. The temperament he was describing is difficult to explain to people who haven't needed it professionally. It's not toughness, exactly. It's not aggression. It's the ability to remain still inside yourself when everything outside is moving fast and loud. The ability to think in terms of outcomes rather than emotions. To ask, what result do I need, and what is the most efficient path to that result, given the specific constraints of this specific situation? Some people have it naturally. Most people can't sustain it under real pressure. I could. It turned out I was very good at a job that required precisely that quality. Over 8 years at Meridian, I worked in Colombia, Mexico, the Philippines, Iraq, and twice in what was then referred to in reports as the Greater Levant region. I will not give you more details than that. The confidentiality agreement I signed was not performative, and some of what I know about some of those situations is still not mine to share. What I will tell you is this: the work made me good at two things that matter later in this story. First, patience. Not passive patience, not just waiting. Active patience. The kind where you're gathering information and building leverage the entire time you're appearing to do nothing. A negotiation that moves too fast fails. A case that moves too fast fails. You build the whole picture before you move. You move only when moving is the thing that closes the outcome you need. Second, reading people in the presence of risk. When a person is lying, when a person is hiding something, when a person is managing what you know and what you don't, there are tells. They're not dramatic. They're not the stuff of TV shows. They're small and specific, and you learn to read them the way a doctor learns to read a chart. Not because any one indicator is definitive, but because the pattern across multiple indicators is. Both of those skills went mostly unused between 2002 and the time Todd Belden decided to steal from me. I signed a confidentiality agreement when I left Meridian. For the past 22 years, almost nobody who knows me has known that part of my life. My daughter Casey found out in pieces when she was about 12, asking about photos she'd found in a box in the basement. I told her some of it. I kept most of it back. Donna knew everything. She was the only person I trusted with all of it. She absorbed it the way she absorbed everything completely, without drama, without making me feel like I needed to manage her reaction. She asked good questions. She understood what she needed to understand. Then she put it away in whatever part of herself held important information and treated me like her husband. That is not a small thing. That is an enormous thing. I have never met another person who could do it the way she did. I came home from Colombia in 2002, called Donna from the airport, and said I was done. She said, "Good. Come home." She'd been pregnant for 4 months. We named Casey after Donna's grandmother. I bought a used Toro mower and a used trailer with about half our savings and started cutting grass. 22 years later, I have 4 employees, 40 residential accounts, and a cracked dashboard. My employee, Clyde Nash, has worked part-time for me for 12 years. He's 68, Vietnam vet, came back from the Mekong Delta in 1971, and spent 40 years working in construction before retiring and discovering he couldn't sit still. He works for me 3 days a week, mostly because he likes being outside and because he refuses to wear his hearing aid and the mowers are loud enough that nobody can tell. Clyde is the kind of man who builds things correctly the first time and then has opinions about how other people build things. We get along well. My other 3 employees are younger. Marcus, 30, who has worked for me for 6 years and handles the scheduling software because I still use a paper calendar by preference. Kim and Dre, both in their late 20s, who do the heavy equipment work and together have taught themselves more about commercial mowing than I knew when I started. I pay them well. They stay. This is the business I built with my hands after I stopped doing the other work. I am proud of it in the specific way that you're proud of something that started from nothing and grew because you showed up every day and did it right. When Todd Belden came to me at that 4th of July cookout, it looked like an opportunity. I thought I was being offered a business relationship. What I was being offered was a mark. The Beldens own 2 Ford dealerships in the Nashville metro area, a commercial strip mall in Brentwood, and a car wash franchise in 3 locations. Old Money by Nashville standards 3rd generation. Ryan's grandfather built the first dealership. His father expanded it. Ryan and his older brother Todd were born into it, the way some people are born into height or good teeth, naturally. Without ever having to think about it, Ryan met Casey when she was 24. She was working in marketing for a healthcare company. He was 31, charming, well-dressed, and very good at making people feel like they were the only person in the room. I know that type. I've sat across from that type in rooms where the charm was the last thing they had left. Charm is impressive until the pressure changes. Then you see what's underneath. I'll be honest, I didn't dislike Ryan at the start. He was attentive to Casey. He remembered details: her favorite restaurant, the name of her best friend from college, the anniversary of Donna's first diagnosis. He showed up at the hospital during one of Donna's bad weeks and sat in the waiting room for 2 hours without being asked. When he proposed at 18 months, I thought, this seems solid. What I didn't see, what I didn't look for, because I was a grieving man who wanted his daughter to be taken care of, was the system underneath the surface. The first time Ryan said something that registered wrong, we were at Donna's funeral reception. A small moment. He was standing with Todd near the back of the room, and he said something I couldn't quite hear, but I watched Todd smile and glance over at me. It was a specific kind of glance, the kind that says, he doesn't know and he won't. I filed it away. I was burying my wife, and I was not going to examine the filing system. A year passed. I opened the hardware store, the lawnmower broke. I hired Marcus and fixed the scheduling system. Life moved. Then Todd made his offer. The Belden business deal came 6 months after Casey and Ryan's wedding. Todd approached me at a 4th of July cookout at Ryan's parents' house. He was carrying a beer and wearing the easy confidence of a man who was used to being the most successful person at any gathering. Mack, he said, in a way that was almost but not quite over familiar. I've been looking at your operation. Seems like you run a tight ship. We do our work, I said. I'm thinking about consolidating the grounds maintenance on our commercial properties. Right now we've got 3 different contractors. He shrugged. Inefficient. He laid out the proposal. 6 commercial properties, 2 dealerships, the strip mall, 3 car wash locations, year-round maintenance contract. He quoted a monthly figure that was more than I currently earn from my 5 largest residential accounts combined. Think about it, he said, and walked away. I thought about it. I ran the numbers. I hired a part-time employee specifically for the new workload. I bought a 2nd commercial mower. I drew up a detailed contract, which Todd reviewed and signed without changes. For the first 2 months, it worked exactly as described. On month 3, the check didn't arrive. Part 2, the first missing payment. I called Todd's office on a Thursday, 8 days after the payment was due. His assistant told me he was in a meeting. I called again on Friday. In a meeting, I left a message the following Monday. It was not returned. On Wednesday, I drove to the Brentwood dealership and asked for him directly. He came out after 12 minutes with an expression that said he'd decided how this conversation would end before it started. Mack. He put a hand on my shoulder, steered me toward a corner of the showroom away from the salespeople. There's an issue with the invoice. What kind of issue? We had some complaints from the strip mall tenants. Quality concerns. The landscaping crew was apparently leaving debris in the parking lot. I looked at him. I was there personally last Tuesday. The parking lot was clean when we left. He shrugged. I'm not saying it was malicious. These things happen. But until we can document a consistent quality standard, he spread his hands. Todd, our contract specifies payment within 15 days of invoice. It also specifies satisfactory completion of services. He smiled. Not warmly. We'll sort it out. He walked away. I stood in the showroom for a moment. A salesman 20 feet away was showing a couple, a truck bed liner. The fluorescent lights hummed. I looked at the back of Todd's head as he disappeared into his office. I had been in rooms where the man across from me was holding a weapon and lying about it with the exact same energy. I drove back to my shop. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 10 minutes before going inside. Then I took out the small spiral notebook I keep in the glove box and wrote down the date, time, and every word of the conversation. Over the next 3 weeks, the quality dispute spread to 2 other properties. I documented everything, before and after photos, time-stamped, with GPS location from my phone. I had signed client satisfaction sheets from 2 tenants at the strip mall who confirmed my crew's work was excellent. I had my employee Clyde Nash Vietnam vet, 68 years old, doesn't need the work but likes staying busy, write out a detailed account of every service visit. I kept all of it in a folder in the false bottom of my truck's underseat storage. Todd made 2 partial payments over the following 6 weeks. Each one was about 40% of what was owed. Each came with a vague explanation about ongoing review. The total outstanding balance hit $11,000. Then I found out about the contracts. One of my residential clients, a woman named Patricia Hollis, who'd been with me for 7 years, called to tell me she'd been solicited by a new service. A flyer had appeared in her neighborhood. The company was called Premier Grounds Nashville. Same service offerings as mine. Similar pricing. I drove by one of their current job sites. I found the address from a yard sign and watched for an hour from a half block away. I recognized the crew, not all of them. But the lead man operating the commercial mower was a guy I'd hired 9 months ago and let go after 3 months because he wasn't reliable. His name was Danny Fry. I ran Premier Grounds Nashville through the Secretary of State's business registration database. The registered agent was Todd Belden's personal attorney. I sat in my truck on a residential street in Brentwood, Tennessee, and did the math. Todd had hired me, gotten access to my operational methods, my client list, which was on the invoices he'd received, my equipment schedule, and my pricing. Then he'd started a competing operation using a disposable crew of cheaper labor, and he was withholding my payments to fund the startup. I reached into the glove box and opened the spiral notebook. I wrote, Premier Grounds SOS filing Todd Belden's attorney as registered agent, Danny Fry on site. This is the play. Then I wrote one more line. Don't do anything yet. I looked at that line for a moment. 20 years ago, I would have found it difficult to write that. The younger version of me, the one who went in because the situation required going in, who moved when he thought something needed to be done, had trouble with not yet. Patience felt like inaction. Inaction felt like failure. I'd had to learn the difference. A job in Mexico City in 2000. A principal who had been held for 9 days. The extraction team was ready. The route was confirmed. We had a window, and I had an instinct, not evidence, an instinct that something was off about the primary exit point. I told Walt Hadley I wanted to wait. He could have overruled me. I was junior. The schedule was already stretched. Every additional day of exposure for the principal was additional risk. Walt said, "Why?" I told him my instinct. I didn't dress it up. I said, "Something feels wrong about the primary." He said, "How long do you need?" I said, 6 hours. He said, "You have 4. 3 hours and 40 minutes in, a secondary surveillance element picked up movement near the primary exit point that confirmed my instinct. We shifted to the secondary route. The principal came out safe. Afterward, Walt sat across from me and said, "You were right to wait. You were also right to say 4 hours and not 4 days. Both of those things are true simultaneously. You have to know when to hold and when to push. Don't do anything yet was me knowing when to hold. I was going to need a few more pieces first." Part 3, the phone call. I wasn't supposed to hear. I want to tell you why I didn't go directly to Casey. The short answer is, she wouldn't have believed me yet, not because she didn't trust me. We'd always been close. Casey was the kind of daughter who called on Tuesday evenings for no reason other than to talk, who drove 40 minutes to bring me soup when I had a bad back, who kept a framed photo of herself and Donna on her office desk even 3 years after. The problem was Ryan. For the past 8 months, something had been shifting. The Tuesday calls came less often. When I mentioned the payment dispute with Todd, she said Ryan had mentioned I'd been a little aggressive in my follow-up. I asked what that meant. She said, "I don't know, Dad. He just said you'd been kind of difficult." That word difficult has a particular shape when it's coming from your own child's mouth about you. I recognized the shape. I had seen it used before in very different contexts. In hostage situations, the captor doesn't keep the hostage in prison through force alone. Force is exhausting and creates resistance. What works better is information management. You control what the person knows about the people who are trying to reach them. You frame the outsider as a threat. You make the person doubt their own instincts. Your dad is difficult. Delivered once, gently, by someone Casey loved and trusted, it was a seed. Delivered repeatedly, and I had no doubt it had been delivered repeatedly, it became a prism. Every call I made about the business dispute was filtered through it. Every question I asked was reframed as evidence of the thing Ryan had told her about me. The way to break that frame was not to argue against it. Arguing against it would confirm it. That's exactly what a difficult person would say. The way to break it was to put evidence in front of Casey that she could evaluate independently in a room where Ryan wasn't present to interpret it for her. I needed more evidence first. I started keeping records the way I'd been trained to keep records. Not just notes. Documentation with specificity and corroboration. Dates, times, what was said, who was present, any physical evidence. I bought a new spiral notebook, the second volume, continuing from the first where I'd been logging the payment disputes. I kept it in the truck's glove box along with a pen that worked and a spare that probably didn't. I photographed every invoice I submitted to Todd's operations. I kept a log of every delivery of service with timestamps from my phone. When one of my crew members mentioned that a Belden property manager had been rude to them, I wrote that down too, not because it was evidence of anything specific, but because patterns show up when you look for them. I learned this from a supervisor at Meridian named Walt Hadley. Walt had 30 years in the business and hands that shook slightly from a nerve condition he never mentioned. He told me once, the difference between a professional and an amateur is that the professional understands the case is built in the quiet time. The confrontation is just the closing argument. You can't make a good closing argument from nothing. I thought about Walt every time I opened that notebook. The phone call happened on a Wednesday in October. I had come to fix Casey's dishwasher. She'd texted me 2 days earlier about a drain issue, and I'd picked up the part on my way across town. I sent her a text from the driveway saying I was there. She didn't respond. Her car was in the driveway. Ryan's was not. I rang the doorbell twice, then used the key she'd given me after Donna died. Case? I called from the entry hall. No answer. But I could hear her upstairs, not talking. On the phone, I could hear the specific cadence of someone listening more than they were speaking. I went to the kitchen. I found the access panel under the sink. I started working, and I heard, very clearly, through the house's open floor plan and the light September air coming through the kitchen window. I know, Ryan, but how long can we actually keep him from no? I'm not saying, Ryan, I'm not saying I don't trust you. I just want to understand the timeline. A pause. What do you mean he won't need to be involved? The house has both our names on it. Longer pause. Ryan, are you saying what does restructured mean? I held the drain wrench and looked at the underside of the sink. I heard Casey say, okay, I'll trust you on this, but you need to tell me these things. You can't just okay. Love you too. Footsteps upstairs. Movement. I finished installing the new drain coupling. I collected my tools. I wrote my work down in the spiral notebook from habit, date, time, repair performed. Then I wrote, restructured, names on house, timeline, keep 'em out. I left before Casey came downstairs. I texted her, fix the drain. Should be good. Love you, Dad. She texted back 20 minutes later, you're a lifesaver. Love you. I sat in my truck in a Quick Trip parking lot for a while before driving home. The cracked dashboard caught the late afternoon light in a way that made it look like a river on a map. I looked at it for a long time. The word restructured had a specific meaning in financial contexts and a specific meaning in family contexts, and in Ryan Belden's mouth, those two meanings were the same thing. I had heard that word used in boardrooms and in wire communications and in conversations where the person using it meant, I am moving something from one place to another, and I would prefer that nobody notice until it's complete. Casey had heard it and felt something was wrong. She'd said as much, you need to tell me these things, which meant she knew, on some level, that things were being done without her knowledge, that some process was in motion she hadn't been invited to understand. But she'd said it to Ryan's voice on a phone, alone in a room, and Ryan's voice had been patient and warm, and she'd said, okay, I'll trust you on this. That was the sentence that I kept coming back to. Not the deception. The deception I could document and address. I'll trust you on this. She was choosing trust over instinct because she loved him. Because that's what you do for the person you love. You extend the benefit of the doubt. You give them the chance to explain. You put your faith in the relationship you built together. I had done the same thing once with a man in a building in Colombia. I had extended the benefit of the doubt because the math of the situation suggested he was safe. I had been wrong. I had learned something from that experience about the cost of deferred judgment. I drove home and made dinner and sat at the table alone. It was going to take me a few more weeks. I was going to do it right. Part 4. What the courthouse told me. I have a friend named Wayne Childs who used to work in the county recorder's office and now does freelance title research. We've been fishing together every fall since 2007. He never asks too many questions. I called him the following Monday. Ryan Belden, I said. Anything interesting in the past 2 years? Public records only, Wayne said. Public records only, I confirmed. He called me back on a Thursday. The Belden family had significant real estate holdings, all of which were in various stages of restructuring through a family LLC. Not unusual, not necessarily alarming. Wayne kept going. Ryan personally had a deed of trust modification on a property in Williamson County, a residential address that matched the house he shared with Casey. The modification had removed Casey's name as a co-borrower 8 months ago and substituted Ryan's parents as guarantors. I asked Wayne to read that back to me. He did. Casey's name had been quietly removed from the mortgage paperwork on her own house 8 months ago, while she presumably believed nothing had changed. I asked Wayne for one more search. Ryan Belden's civil judgments, past 3 years. Wayne was quiet for a moment. Mack, he said. There are 3. The 3 civil judgments totaled $284,000. 2 were from private arbitration, listed only as contract disputes, no specific names of the creditors. The 3rd was from a company registered in Nevada. I'd seen that kind of structure before. Not in Nashville. In other contexts, in other countries, with other kinds of men, private arbitration awards not tied to a specific plaintiff. Nevada registered entities, amounts that ended in round numbers. Those were gambling debts, structured to look like contract disputes. Thank you, Wayne, I said. You doing all right? Working on it. I drove to the hardware store and bought a new folder. Then I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, looking at the folder on the passenger seat and the cracked dashboard above it. I thought about the woman at Donna's funeral, one of her colleagues from Hillsdale Elementary, a woman who'd been teaching next door to Donna for 15 years. She'd hugged me at the reception and said, "She talked about you every September when school started. She used to say, 'My husband fixes things quietly. That's his gift.'" I hadn't known Donna said that. I'd sat with it ever since. I organized everything I had into chronological order in the parking lot. Todd's payment disputes, the Premier Grounds Nashville sauce filing, the phone call notes, Wayne's title research summary, the judgment records. I put the folder in the false bottom of the truck's underseat storage. Then I called a man I hadn't spoken to in 11 years. His name was Keith Mercer. We'd worked together at Meridian. He'd left 2 years after me and had started a small private investigations firm in Memphis. He did insurance work, background research, asset verification. "Stovall," he said when he picked up. "No, hello. That's just how Keith talked." "I need 2 things," I said. "Okay. I need someone to run a comprehensive asset picture on a man named Ryan Belden, Nashville area. And I need a referral for a family law attorney with experience in fraudulent conveyance cases." Keith didn't ask why. "Give me 5 days," he said. I gave him the basic details. He hung up. I put the truck in drive and went back to work. I had 3 accounts to service before dark. Clyde was waiting on me at the second one, with the push mower already running. "Everything okay?" Clyde shouted over the mower noise. He wasn't wearing his hearing aid. He never wore the hearing aid. "Fine," I said. He nodded and went back to work. He had a thermos of coffee in his truck's cup holder that he'd brought from home, and he refilled his travel mug twice during our 2-hour stretch, which was a lot even for Clyde. He didn't ask me anything else. That's one of the things I value most about Clyde. 68 years of living has taught him which silences need filling and which ones don't. Part 5, the full picture. Keith Mercer called back in 4 days, not 5. He'd found the complete financial picture. The gambling debts were real and substantially larger than the judgment record suggested. The 3 civil judgments were the ones that had made it to formal proceedings. Keith had identified 2 additional private debt arrangements, one to an individual in Clarksville, one to a holding company in Brentwood that Ryan had negotiated directly. Total personal liability, approximately $340,000. The asset transfers told the story plainly. Over the past 14 months, Ryan had been methodically moving marital assets out of jointly held accounts and into accounts held solely under his name or under a family LLC he created 11 months ago, right around the time I'd noticed the Tuesday calls getting less frequent. Cash accounts, a brokerage account that had been in both their names. One of Casey's vehicles was re-registered to Ryan's parents' LLC without a corresponding sale or value exchange. Casey's name had also been moved off a joint bank account that received direct deposit from Ryan's salary. She still had her own account from her marketing job. Ryan hadn't touched that yet. But the joint account, which she presumably believed was still joint, was no longer joint. The house mortgage change Wayne had found was part of the same pattern. Keith had also verified the Premier Grounds Nashville operation. It was generating revenue. Todd was the silent owner. Danny Fry and two other former employees of mine were running the cruise. I sat at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night and looked at everything laid out in front of me. The folder, the notebook, Keith's type summary, Wayne's records. I thought about Donna. She had a thing she used to say when I was working through a problem. She'd come into whatever room I was in with a cup of tea I hadn't asked for, set it next to me, and say, "You already know what to do. You just want someone to tell you it's all right." I looked at the empty chair across from me. The tea would have been chamomile. She always made chamomile at night, from bags she bought at the health food store because she said they tasted better. I used to tell her I couldn't taste the difference. She'd say, "I know you can't. That's why I'm the one who buys them." I closed the folder. There was a night in 1999, I can tell you the year, because of the job it was attached to, when I sat in a safe house outside Ciudad Juarez for 6 hours, waiting on confirmation that a route was clear. 6 hours. In a room the size of a closet, with no reliable communication, knowing that the people I'd been sent to get out were less than 2 miles away. 6 hours of doing nothing. I have never been in a room that tested patience the way that room did. Not before, not since. Because the thing you fight against in those hours is not boredom. It's the voice that says, "Go now. Do something. You're wasting time." Every minute you wait is a minute something can go wrong. And the voice isn't entirely wrong. Every minute of waiting is a minute of exposure. But moving before the route is confirmed is how you turn a dangerous situation into a catastrophic one. Walt Hadley had been the supervisor on that job. He checked in on the radio at hour 4 and asked how I was holding up. "I'm fine," I said, which was not entirely true. He said, "The worst thing you can do right now is decide something is happening that isn't. Stay with what you know." That's the whole discipline. Stay with what you know. I had been practicing it for 2 years on Ryan Belden. Every time Casey's Tuesday call came a day late or felt shorter than usual, I stayed with what I knew. Every time I saw Ryan's face at a family gathering and felt the instinct to confront, I stayed with what I knew. Every missed payment, every attorney letter that went unanswered, I stayed with the process. Now I knew everything. Now it was time to move. I want to be clear about something. I didn't want revenge on Ryan Belden. I want you to understand that, because it's the part of this story that's hardest to explain to people who haven't had to sit with this kind of knowledge about someone in their own family. I wanted my daughter to know what was being done to her. I wanted her to have the information she needed before something irrevocable happened, before the house was sold, before the accounts were empty, before she woke up one morning to find she had nothing in her own name and no legal footing. That was the whole goal. Everything else was secondary. The question was how to give her information she would actually receive. Because here is what I knew. If I sat down with Casey and said, "Your husband is stealing from you," the first thing she would do is call Ryan. And Ryan would have a prepared answer. He always had a prepared answer. And Casey, who loved him, who had been told repeatedly by the man she trusted most that her father was difficult, would hear his answer before she'd fully absorb mine. I needed her to see the evidence without Ryan in the room. The only way to do that was to go through Todd first. Part 5, the confrontation. There's a moment in hostage negotiation, a moment I've been in more times than I care to remember, where the situation is about to break. Either the negotiation holds and people walk out of a room alive, or something shifts and everything you built in the past hours collapses. The tell is always the same. The person in control becomes certain they're in control. Certainty makes people careless. Careless people do things that give you leverage. I had been watching Todd Belden become certain for 2 months. He'd gotten away with the payment dispute. He'd gotten away with the competing company. He'd stopped responding to my attorney's letters with anything more than form denials. He had a system that was working and no reason to think it wouldn't keep working. From where he stood, Mack Stovall was a landscaper who was making noise. Landscapers who made noise eventually got tired and went away. That was his read. He needed to feel the system working one more time. I sent him a formal letter through my attorney demanding payment of the full outstanding balance, now $14,000, and informing him that I intended to file in General Sessions Court the following week if payment was not received. I sent it certified mail on a Monday morning. By Wednesday, Todd had called my cell phone 3 times. I didn't answer. By Thursday, he'd left 2 voicemails. The first was professional and clipped. The second one said, "Stovall, you need to come talk to me." In person. This week. His voice had the edge of a man who was used to calls being returned immediately. I called him back on Friday morning. I can come by the dealership, I said. Good, Monday. And he hung up. I spent the weekend not thinking about it, because thinking about it too much is how you arrive with the wrong energy. I serviced 3 accounts. I made my pasta on Sunday. I went to sleep at a reasonable hour. Monday morning, I drove to the hardware store and bought a small digital recorder for $12. Tennessee is a one-party consent state, which my attorney had already confirmed. The recorder was small enough to fit in my shirt pocket with the collar of my flannel covering it. I put fresh batteries in. I pressed record in the parking lot before I walked through the service entrance. Part 6, 17 seconds. Todd met me between the lift bays. He'd planned it that way, I could tell. Not in the showroom where customers could see. Not in his office where there was a desk between us and cameras in the hallway. Between the lift bays, where it was loud and industrial and the 2 mechanics working could hear but not easily see everything, and the social norm was men talking to each other the way men talk when they think they're off the record. He walked toward me at pace. That was the first tell a man walking at pace toward someone he's about to manage politely doesn't walk at pace. He walks neutrally, shoulder open, leaves space. Todd was closing distance aggressively. He grabbed my collar inside the first 3 seconds. Take your invoices and your lawyers and crawl back to whatever ditch you came from, old man. Jerry Pittman, the parts manager, was 8 feet away with his world's Oakest mechanic coffee mug frozen halfway to his mouth. One of the mechanics had looked up from under a vehicle at the sound of movement. I want to be precise about what I did next, because it matters and because I want you to understand it wasn't aggression. I did not hit Todd Belden. I did not push him. I did not raise my voice. I took his wrist with my left hand and applied a specific kind of rotational pressure, a control hold, not an attack that separated his grip from my collar without requiring any particular force. The principle is leverage over joint mechanics. You redirect the wrist's natural range of motion slightly past the comfortable range, which produces release without pain, without escalation, without requiring the strength differential that most physical confrontations are built around. You learn it from necessity when you spend years in situations where escalating to physical conflict is the worst possible outcome. When you understand that the moment a negotiation becomes a fight, everything you've built toward resolution dissolves. The entire motion took less than 2 seconds. Todd looked at his own hand, then at me. For a moment, he looked genuinely confused. Not angry confused, actually confused. The kind of confused that comes when your working model of a situation doesn't match what just happened in front of you. The broken coffee machine in the corner made its grinding noise. It did that every few minutes. I'd noticed it when I walked in. I reached into my shirt pocket and set the recorder on the tool chest beside us. That's been running since I walked in, I said. Before that was a phone I've been running since October. One-party consent, all of it's legal. Todd stared at the recorder. His expression was doing several calculations simultaneously. I've got about 40 minutes of audio across the various calls, I said, including a conversation where you and Ryan discuss the Premier Grounds Nashville setup, including a call where Ryan tells Casey the house is being restructured, including a conversation where your name comes up in connection with the debt arrangement through the Clarksville contact. Todd's face went through several things. It landed on something between controlled rage and reassessment. You can't come in here and... I'm not here to threaten you, I said. I'm here because I have a daughter, and what you and your brother have been doing to her has to stop. Jerry Pittman had not moved. One of the mechanics had come fully out from under the vehicle and was standing against the far wall. Todd lowered his voice. You don't know what you're talking about. The 3 civil judgments total $284,000. The additional private arrangements bring it to roughly $340,000. The asset transfer started 14 months ago when Ryan realized he couldn't cover the debts from income. I watched his face. The house deed modification is in your parents' names as guarantors. The joint bank account is now a solo account under Ryan's name. Her vehicle is registered to the family LLC. Todd said nothing. You're going to get Casey on the phone right now, I said. Or I'm going to walk out of here, file the civil case, and everything in this folder goes to her attorney and to the DA's office. Because some of what I have constitutes fraudulent conveyance, and in Tennessee that can reach into criminal territory. Todd looked at me the way men look when they're recalculating something they thought was already settled. You could have just gone to Casey directly, he said. I could have, I agreed. But then Ryan would have had an answer ready before she finished reading what I had. And you'd have had time to move assets. I picked up the recorder. I needed you to know that I know. Right now. Before any of that happened. I put the recorder back in my shirt pocket. You've got a choice, I said. You can be the person who helped this land cleanly, or you can be the person who made it worse. I looked at him for a moment. You've got a daughter someday, maybe. Oraison. Think about which one of those you want to be. Then I walked out through the service entrance the same way I'd come in. Behind me, the coffee machine ground again. Part 7. What happens when you drive away? I want to tell you something about what happens after a moment like that. People imagine that there's a rush, some kind of adrenaline high, the satisfaction of the confrontation finally happening. In my experience, in 8 years of professional experience and 2 years of this particular situation, there isn't. There's just the drive home and the silence of the truck and the cracked dashboard in the afternoon light. I drove to my shop, changed out of my work shirt into a cleaner one, checked the recorder it had captured clearly, everything from the parking lot walk-in to the grinding coffee machine sound after I left. I called my attorney and told her I needed 30 minutes of her time by phone. We talked through the legal options. She confirmed the posture I already understood. The documentation was solid, the recordings were admissible, and the fraudulent conveyance question on the mortgage modification alone was worth taking seriously. You're sure you want to give Todd the chance to call Casey first? She asked. If he calls her, he tips Ryan. Ryan prepares a defense before I can get the information to her directly. And if he doesn't call her, then I go to her directly and he's already made his choice. I paused. I've been watching him for 2 months. He's not going to call her. She was quiet for a moment. All right, she said. But the moment you have confirmation of what she knows, call me. I said I would. I went to Casey's neighborhood. I didn't go to her house. I drove past it slowly and parked 2 blocks away. There was a school nearby. It was 3:30 inches the afternoon, and the carpool lines were still moving. A boy on a bicycle crossed the street without looking. A yellow dog watched him from a front porch. I had an envelope in the back seat. Inside was a 1-page summary my attorney had helped me draft, plain language, no legal jargon, specifically written for Casey to read without a translator. Wayne's title research result. The judgment totals with source documentation. The account changes. A timeline. Clipped to the front was a business card for Andrea Solis. I also put in one other thing. A photograph. Taken from the box in my basement, the box Casey had found when she was 12. It showed me at 30, in field gear, in a country I won't name, beside a man whose name I won't give, with an expression on my face that no amount of flannel and cracked dashboards could produce. I put it in because I wanted Casey to understand something she didn't yet know. That the man who had been called difficult by her husband was not who Ryan had described. That her instinct to trust her father was not a failure of judgment. I was not a fragile man who needed managing. I was a man who had spent 2 years building a case because I loved her. I looked at the envelope for a long time. The afternoon light in the neighborhood was the particular gold that September does in Tennessee, the kind that makes ordinary things look important. I drove to Casey's house and put the envelope in her mailbox. Then I drove home and made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table and waited. She called at 7:43 that evening. Not with anger. That's what surprised me. I'd prepared for anger, the first response when someone you love presents information that overturns a belief you've held for months. The resistance before the understanding. There was no anger. There was just her voice, quiet in the way voices get when the crying has run its course and what's left is something more settled and more real. Dad, she said. I'm here, I said. How long have you known? I had pieces starting in October. The full picture came together last month. Silence. I heard her breathing. Why didn't you? She stopped. Ryan told me you were causing problems with Todd, that you were being aggressive about the invoice thing, that it was starting to affect his relationship with his brother. I know he told you that. I believed him. I know. The silence between us had a texture to it, not accusatory. Something more complicated, the sound of someone carefully separating two things they had believed were connected and discovering they weren't. The gambling, she said. Not a question, a recognition. The judgments are public record. I had a friend pull them from the county database. He said those were. She stopped. He said they were from a business dispute. I said nothing. I let her sit with that. The house, she said. Wayne Childs pulled the deed modification. It was filed 8 months ago. Another silence. My name is just gone? Your name is just gone. She was quiet for a long time. I could hear the specific silence of a person sitting still in a room. What do I do? She finally said. The card on the front of the envelope. Andrea Solis. Call her tomorrow morning. Do not call her from your home phone or your work phone. Call from your personal cell. Somewhere Ryan isn't. Okay. Don't tell Ryan about this call. Okay. Don't change anything that looks like normal. Don't move anything. Don't close anything. Don't say anything that sounds different from a normal evening. Just be normal until you've talked to Andrea. Dad? Is this? She searched for the word. Is this the Meridian stuff? Some of it. The photograph in the envelope. Yeah. Silence. Then, I always wondered what you weren't telling me. I know. And Casey? Yeah. You're wearing Mom's bracelet, aren't you? A pause. I don't know why I asked. I just knew. I wear it every day. Her voice changed slightly. Dad? I know, I said. She cried for a minute. I held the phone and looked at the empty chair across from me. I didn't say anything into the silence because she didn't need me to fill it. She needed me to stay in it with her. When she was done, she said, I'll call you tomorrow. I'll be here, I said. I love you. I love you too, Case. She hung up. I put the phone down on the table. Outside the kitchen window, the September dark had come in completely. The yard was invisible, just the window and my reflection in it. I reached over and turned the porch light on, just because I felt like it. Part 8. The gold charm bracelet. I want to tell you about Donna's bracelet. She bought it herself, years before we met. A thin gold chain with 4 charms, a small book, a pencil, an apple, and a schoolhouse. First grade teacher charms. She wore it every single day of her teaching career, 31 years. She wore it to the grocery store and to backyard barbecues and to church. She wore it on the days when she didn't feel well enough to stand up, the last few months, until the hospital put the IV in and she couldn't wear it anymore. When Casey was cleaning out her things, she found it in Donna's jewelry box with a post-it note on the clasp that said, "See, this is yours now. Love, Mom." Donna hadn't told me she'd written that note. She'd known she was running out of time and she'd quietly handled it herself, the way she handled most things. Casey wore it to the funeral. She hasn't taken it off since. I have seen that bracelet across 100 dinner tables. I have seen it on the arm Casey rested on my shoulder when she fell asleep on the couch during a movie. I have seen it on the wrist she extended when she signed her marriage certificate. I saw it on her wrist the first time she came to my house after all of this happened. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, Donna's chair, without thinking about it, and we ate the chili I'd made, and neither of us said very much because there was too much to say, and the chili was hot. Afterwards, she washed the bowls without being asked, the way she'd done since she was 6. I watched her at the sink. She turned around. I keep thinking about what Mom would say, she said. What do you think she'd say? Casey looked at the bracelet on her wrist. Turn it once around the way you turn a ring. She'd say, you already knew something was wrong. You just didn't want to look at it. I looked at my daughter. Yeah, I said. She probably would. Part 9, what came next? Ryan's response, once Andrea Solis filed the formal petition, moved through 3 predictable stages. First, denial. He denied everything. The civil judgments were resolved, business disputes, nothing to do with gambling. The account changes were estate planning. He'd intended to explain them. The house modification was temporary and would be reversed. He had a prepared answer for every item in the documentation package, individual answers, each of which sounded plausible in isolation. This is what people who manage information for a living are trained to do. They segment the evidence. They address each piece separately, in isolation, so the cumulative pattern never becomes visible to the person listening. Each answer is technically arguable. The problem only becomes obvious when you look at all 14 answers at once. Andrea Solis laid them out side by side in a document I never saw, but that Casey described to me later. 3 pages, 2 columns. On the left, each item in Ryan's documentation response. On the right, the combined pattern those items formed. Casey read it at Andrea's office. Ryan was not present. She called me that evening. Her voice had a specific quality I recognized, not grief, not anger, something harder and more settled than either. The quality of a person who has seen the whole picture clearly and is now deciding what to do with it. He had an answer for everything, she said. I know. They all made sense individually. That's how it works. She was quiet for a moment. He sat across from me at our kitchen table the night after I got the envelope, and he said all of it was a misunderstanding and that you were trying to make trouble, and that he was sorry I'd been upset. A pause. He was very calm. He touched my hand. What did you do? I said okay and went to bed. Another pause. I already had the appointment with Andrea for 9 o'clock the next morning. He didn't know that. I thought about that for a moment, my daughter sitting at her kitchen table, listening to a prepared narrative she already knew was wrong, saying okay and going to bed. Not because she believed him, because she was protecting her ability to act. She'd learned something from me after all. The second stage was negotiation. Ryan's attorney, once he saw the full documentation package, pivoted quickly from denial to offer. Full restoration of the accounts, return of the vehicle registration, a financial transparency agreement for the duration of any separation period, a goodwill payment to Casey of $15,000 to offset her inconvenience. The $15,000 number told its own story. It was calculated just high enough to seem significant, just low enough to be paid without liquidating anything. A number arrived at by someone who had been calculating what things cost for a long time. Andrea's response was measured and precise. She submitted a counter-demand that included full forensic accounting of all marital assets for the preceding 24 months, not just the accounts in dispute. She also submitted a demand letter to the Belden family, LLC's registered attorney, regarding the fraudulent conveyance question on the house deed modification. That last item changed the pace of the negotiation considerably. The Belden family attorney responded within 48 hours, which in legal time means someone had been waiting by the phone. There followed 4 weeks of communications that Casey relayed to me in fragments, not because she was hiding anything, but because the legal language required translation, and she was still learning the language. The short version, the Beldens wanted this handled privately, quietly, without the fraudulent conveyance question going anywhere that would generate additional scrutiny of family assets. They were willing to pay for that. The third stage was reality. The settlement terms that emerged after 3 months of negotiation were more than Casey would have received from a simple divorce filing. The house was restored to her name and to her name alone, as sole owner with the Belden family guarantors removed. The depleted accounts were restored to their original balances. The vehicle was returned, and a lump sum settlement was paid that accounted for the $68,000 of her money that Ryan had spent on debt service over 14 months. Ryan got his private resolution. Casey got back what had been taken from her. I am not going to tell you this was justice. The gambling debt still existed. Ryan's creditors were still owed their money. The pattern that had led to all of this, the borrowing, the hiding, the management of information didn't go anywhere. Those are Ryan Belden's problems now, and they are substantial. But Casey walked out of that marriage with her assets intact and her name on her own house. That was the goal. She filed for divorce in January. Todd's situation was entirely separate and considerably less complicated. My attorney filed in General Sessions Court for the outstanding $14,000. Todd settled before the court date, full payment of the balance plus attorney fees, paid within 15 days of filing. No counterclaims, no further contact from his side. Whatever Todd's calculation was about the recordings and the Premier Grounds Nashville exposure, he made it quickly and paid the number. I've thought about what Todd told Ryan after the dealership. I wasn't in those conversations. But I know that Ryan had an attorney engaged within 48 hours of my attorney submitting the initial family court petition, which means someone had made a phone call quickly. Either Todd called Ryan immediately, or Ryan had already been expecting something to happen and had a contingency ready, possibly both. Either way, what they'd built together was never going to survive someone looking at it directly. The whole structure depended on nobody looking. I looked. Premier Grounds Nashville dissolved its business registration 4 months after the settlement. I have no information about what happened to Danny Fry. I don't spend time thinking about Todd. Jerry Pittman, the parts manager with a coffee mug, sent me a text message about 3 months after the confrontation. It said, "Just wanted you to know I told Todd the day before you came in that what he was doing to your invoices wasn't right. He didn't listen. Glad it worked out." I texted back, "Appreciate it, Jerry. Take care of yourself." That was the most I heard from anyone at the Belden operation. Casey moved into a rental apartment in April. Small place, clean, with a south-facing kitchen window that catches morning light in a way she mentioned on the phone the first week she was there. She put a picture of herself and Donna on the kitchen windowsill. She came over for dinner 2 weeks after she moved in. We ate at the kitchen table. I made pasta, same recipe I've been making since 1997. She ate 2 bowls and then sat back in her chair with the look she's had since she was 8 years old, when something was good enough that she didn't want to get up and leave. She told me about a woman at her office who had offered to help her move boxes. She told me about a restaurant 2 blocks from the new apartment that had a patio she liked. She told me Clyde had called her. She'd been close with Clyde since she was small, used to call him the man who doesn't wear his hearing aid, and told her to let him know if she needed anything moved or repaired. He called from the landline, Casey said. He always calls from the landline. He left a message on my cell. He said, "Casey, it's Clyde Nash. Your dad says you're doing fine, but I figure I should hear that from you directly." And then he said, "The hearing aid was on, before you ask." I laughed. Real laughter. The kind I hadn't done much of in 2 years. "Was the hearing aid on?" Casey said. "Absolutely not," I said. She laughed too. After dinner, she carried the bowls to the sink without being asked, the way she'd done since she was 6 years old. I watched her at the sink. She turned around. "I keep thinking about what Mom would say," she said. "What do you think she'd say?" Casey looked at the bracelet on her wrist, turned it once. She'd say, "You already knew something was wrong. You just didn't want to look at it." I looked at my daughter. "Yeah," I said. "She probably would." Then Casey looked at me with an expression I recognized, because it was one I'd worn myself before. The expression of someone who just understood something they'd known for a long time. "She used to say that to you, didn't she?" Casey said. "About the cases at Meridian. Sometimes. Was she usually right?" I thought about it honestly, more than I was comfortable with. Casey smiled. The first real one I'd seen in months. Her mother's smile, which it always was, which it will always be. Part in the notebook. There's a spiral notebook in my truck's glove box. It's the 3rd one I've kept in my life. The first was from a job in Guatemala in 1998. The second from a situation in 2001 I won't describe. This one I started the day Todd Belden first gave me the quality dispute excuse, and I went to my truck, sat in the parking lot, and wrote down the date and the exact words. The last entry is dated the Thursday I left the envelope in Casey's mailbox. It says, "Envelope in mailbox. 5:40, 2 p.m. Done." Below that, I wrote 2 more lines. Not operational notes. Not for the case. Just something I needed to write down. Donna would have figured this out 6 months before I did, but she would have been glad I got there. I keep the notebook in the glove box still. Not for any particular reason. It fits there, between a pen that works and a pen that probably doesn't, and it's the right place for it. Part 11, What Quiet Costs. I want to be clear with you about something I've been dancing around. People will read this story as a story about a man who kept his head and won. About patience paying off. About the quiet guy who turned out to have more than anyone knew. That's a version of what happened. It's not the complete version. Here's the complete version. Casey spent 14 months in a marriage while an asset transfer was occurring. 14 months of being told her instincts about her father were wrong. 14 months of making financial decisions trusting that joint accounts were still joint. She signed documents she didn't fully understand because she trusted the man who put them in front of her. She was 27 years old and starting over in a rental apartment. That is what I'm sitting with. Not Todd, not Ryan. The 14 months? I think about when I should have moved sooner. When I stood at Donna's funeral and watched Ryan smile at something in the corner, I should have asked someone what that was. When the Tuesday calls started getting shorter and less frequent, I should have driven to their house unannounced more than once. When Casey said Ryan called me difficult, I should have had a direct, full conversation with her that same evening rather than absorbing the information and going home. I was patient the way I'd been trained to be patient. I built the case the right way. Those things are true, but patience has a cost. And the cost in this case was 14 months of Casey's life. I don't know how to fully reconcile those two things. I'm not sure they can be fully reconciled. I made the best choices I could with what I knew. Some of those choices, in hindsight, I would make differently. That's the honest version. I also want to say something about the photograph I put in the envelope. I've thought about that choice a lot. It was a sentimental decision, not a strategic one. Andrea Solis didn't need it. The legal case didn't need it. Casey didn't need it to evaluate the documents. I put it in because I needed Casey to know, before she read anything else, that I was not who she'd been told I was. That her instinct to trust me, the instinct that Ryan had spent 14 months quietly undermining, was not a failure of judgment. She deserved that. Before the evidence, before the legal summary, before the attorney's card, she deserved to know who her father was. I've been asked if I was ever scared during this whole process. Not scared of Todd. I've been in rooms with more dangerous people than Todd Belden, and I managed them without the advantages I had at his dealership. Not scared of the legal exposure. My attorney was good and my documentation was solid. Scared of Casey, of losing her, of the scenario where I showed her everything and she chose Ryan anyway, of the scenario where Ryan had done his work so thoroughly that no amount of evidence was going to be enough. That was the fear. Not the confrontation. The possibility of doing everything right and still losing the most important thing. She didn't choose him. She chose her own eyes. I'm grateful for that every day. 6 months after the filing, Casey drove over on a Saturday morning. She brought coffee from the place on Charlotte Pike that she knows I like. We sat on my porch. The yard needed work. I'd been light on my own place since everything started, which is always how it goes when you're running someone else's crisis. She put her coffee cup down and looked at the yard. You should let me help you do the back beds this weekend, she said. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She looked at me sideways. The same look she's been giving me since she was about 5. I want to. We worked for 4 hours. She dug and I planted. She's stronger than she looks. She gets that from Donna. At some point, she said, without stopping her digging, did you ever think about telling me earlier? Like before you had everything? Yes, I said. Why didn't you? Because you needed to see it without Ryan in the room. If I told you before I had the full picture, he'd have an answer ready. You'd hear his answer before you finished reading mine. She dug for a minute. That's frustratingly logical. I've had some practice at this. She paused and looked at me. The Meridian stuff. Yeah. She went back to digging. You never told me all of it. No. Sometime, she said. Not a demand, just an opening. Sometime, I said. We finished the back beds. She stayed for dinner. I made the pasta. She ate 2 bowls. After she left, I washed the dishes. I looked out the kitchen window at the yard we'd worked on together in the afternoon, now dark. I dried the bowls and put them away. I sat at the kitchen table for a while before bed, not thinking about anything particular, just sitting with the quiet. Donna's chair was across from me. The September light had been good today, the kind that makes ordinary things look like they mean something. Maybe they do. A final section. What quiet costs. There's a version of this story where I'm the hero, where I swooped in and saved my daughter and exposed the bad guys and everything tied up clean. That's not what happened. I've told you what actually happened. The 14 months. The things I would change. The incomplete reconciliation of having done it right and still having it cost something real. Here's what I actually believe after 58 years of this particular life. The quiet ones are not passive. We are not harmless. We are not background characters. We are the people who understood early that noise is expensive. That the loudest person in a room is usually the person who has already lost control of the situation. That information gathered carefully is worth more than 10 confrontations had on somebody else's schedule. I learned that at Meridian. I learned it from Walt Hadley and from situations I won't describe in Guatemala and Iraq and other places. I learned it professionally, which gave me a shortcut that most people don't have. But here's what I believe most people already know. Even without the training, the right moment to act is not the first moment you know you should. It's the moment when acting will accomplish what you need to accomplish. Those are different moments, and the time between them is not wasted. The time between them is the work. Donna understood this. She spent 31 years in a room with 23 6-year-olds, and she understood it by necessity. You cannot manage a first-grade classroom by reacting to every moment as it happens. You read the room. You build relationships before you need them. You set systems in place while everything is still manageable. And then when the moment comes, you act with all of that preparation behind you. She taught first grade the same way I extracted people from dangerous rooms. Neither of us would have described it that way, but it was the same underlying skill. The bracelet is 4 charms: a book, a pencil, an apple, a schoolhouse. 31 years of showing up every morning in a room full of children who needed someone to be steady. Casey wears it every day. I don't think that's an accident. I think Casey is more like her mother than either of them knew while Donna was alive to see it. She reads situations carefully. She stays quiet when quiet is the right tool. She extends trust when trust is worth extending, and she withdraws it cleanly and without drama when she finds out it was misused. That Saturday morning in the back beds, she dug with the same focused energy Donna used to bring to everything. Head down, steady, not talking much. Getting it done. When she left, she hugged me for a few seconds longer than usual. The bracelet was on her wrist. Book, pencil, apple, schoolhouse. I stood on the porch after her car turned out of the driveway and watched the neighborhood settle into its Saturday afternoon quiet. Then I went inside, washed my hands, and made coffee. Sat at the kitchen table. The empty chair was across from me where it always is. We did okay, I said. The house was quiet. I drank the coffee. If you've ever had to hold your fire when everything in you wanted to move, if you've ever chosen patience over explosion because you knew explosion would cost more than it would solve, this story is for you. The quiet ones aren't passive. We're just choosing our moment. If this story hit you somewhere real, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever done something slow and careful to protect someone who didn't even know they needed protecting, tell me about that too, because that deserves to be said out loud. Tell me, was there a moment in this story where you would have moved sooner, where you couldn't have held it together that long? Be honest below. Know someone who handles everything quietly while the noise goes on around them? Send this to them. They'll understand.